Katina Rigall Zipay. I'm fresh back from EuroShop 2020 at the end of February and stuck at home like I know a lot of you are. So this is going to be a really fun time where we get to focus on some of the interesting new design trends that are taking place, and we can sort of forget about the quarantine for an hour, or what is it, half an hour to 45 minutes here. I'm really excited. I think you guys are going to enjoy these pictures that I've compiled and the way I've arranged them for you to really grasp the trends that have become evident as of the EuroShop show. I'm going to go ahead and jump in. I think there may be a few people still yet to join, but it's time, so let's go for it. All right, so we all know interactives are very important for trade show exhibits. And there was no exception at EuroShop. There was a lot of interactives to experience. This is a simple one using an iPad to apply makeup. You can choose what color makeup you want to wear just by looking into the iPad. I'm going to play a few more interactives for you. There were a lot of videos that I took at EuroShop. It seems that there's so much that you can only see with really accurately with a video, because there's a lot of movement involved in the exhibits these days. So this is an augmented reality application. Are you familiar with that? Here's virtual reality. I think we're all pretty familiar with virtual reality at this point. There's some other experiential ideas that involve projection. You know, it seems like a fairly simple light projection, but it actually is interactive. You touch the wall in a specific place, it pops up a brand message, product, things that they want you to see about their company. Here's another interactive involving products. I mean, EuroShop is a retail show, so they talk a lot about products and how to display products there. Now, this is where you pick up a product and the sensor automatically knows which product you picked up, and it pops up information about that particular product that you've just touched. Interactives could also be very fun and playful. You're graffitiing on the wall here with LED light projection. Another LED interactive projection. I've got quite a few here, so I'm just going to get through. This is a smart glass that could display an image, or it could be interactive if you wanted to touch and interact and find some information about this product and company. And this is just really fun. I mean, you've got video walls all around. You don't necessarily have to touch it. It's not really reacting to the people who are there, but it is just a super fun experience for people to go through. Okay, so that brings me to the topic of movement. Not only are there interactive, but there's also just the ability with design now to incorporate movement. And we were really interested and intrigued when we were at EuroShop to see that there were so many exhibits where you, for instance, this is an example of a picture I took, and I'm kicking myself that I did not take a video, because this wall here was twinkling. These eyes are actually screens, and these eyes were looking back and forth. They were blinking, and it was a really interesting effect. And when you have this picture, I'm looking at it now, and it's just sort of like lackluster in the excitement that really was there in that space if you were experiencing the movement. So I'm going to show you a few examples where you had to move and interact, or just movement was involved. For instance, you don't have to do anything to cause this grouping of monitors to start playing this presentation, but the polarization layer on the monitors was pulled out and hanging in front in this dimensional display. And so you wanted to walk around, you wanted to look, and the movement was created by you as you interacted with that display. There was a lot of video walls that, again, didn't necessarily require anyone to touch or interact to get it started. But the thing that really impressed me about a bunch of these video wall presentations is that the programming was quite long and extensive and very creative. It just went from one display to the next. Just it evolved. This hanging sign from Duo especially, I had a few favorite things that I saw it do, and by the time I pulled my phone out to record it, I felt like I had to, you know, stand there maybe for half an hour if I wanted to get back to the part of the program that I had been really interested in videoing. So it just kept changing and changing, and I don't think I saw it do the same thing but twice. So it was just really long, intricate video wall programming. This is another small video wall with interesting movement. And I think the word that I would use to describe a lot of the new things I saw at EuroShop also is subtle. I mean, this is really, you know, it's not bright and flashy and in your face. It's really interesting. It's this nice little twinkling of light. You aren't turned off by it. You're not like, oh my gosh, I just got blinded and I can't look. Everything had this nice subtle quality, especially with the movement and with the lighting. Video walls, again, in a different sort of format and placement. This whole exhibit here had interesting video wall programming, and sizes and shapes were different. Yep. And this is another display where the video walls were long and horizontal. There was quite a long program on these ones as well that went through some different programming. Video wall embedded in the wall, video wall embedded in the floor, just to create interest. Projection was key. A lot of people did short throw projection. You see the projector down here in this case. Sometimes it's above, sometimes it's below, but it's creating some really interesting movement. Projection again here, LED lights that are changing and moving, and then projection on the ends of this exhibit. Oh, these things, we saw quite a few of 3D holograms. They don't have those gaps in them if you see them in real life. The video is what creates those sort of gaps in the space. But it's very cool to see some of these, the way some of these 3D holograms were implemented. Here's a simple little bit of movement. Really, they're just using gravity, but you wouldn't believe the crowd that was gathered there to just watch this car sort of take its zigzag path down this orange wall. It was interesting. It captured people's attention. Let's see here. The mannequin hall had some good examples incorporating movement. This was an interesting retail display incorporating movement. And also notice this mirror glass. We're going to talk about some mirror textures in just a moment. Okay, so now here goes. Material trends. All right, so you can get an idea from this first slide that there's a lot of texture involved, a lot of things that you kind of want to reach out with and touch with your hand. Different textures incorporated in one single space. One of the textures that we saw a ton of was unfinished wood. So really no varnish, no paint, nothing. It's really just a rough, unfinished wood. I mean, you have maybe some graphics applied to it, cut perhaps on a CNC machine and fitted together in a specific way. But that unfinished light-colored wood was everywhere. Mirror, the shiny textures, glossy textures you can see, and also mirror, actual mirror. Here's panels of mirror in this booth, panels of mirror with with wording on them. Mirror built into the structure of this exhibit. Here's a mirror kiosk with a touch screen embedded in it. And, you know, when the touch screen goes dead, it just looks like a big mirror box and you can't see the touch screen. But then when the touch screen lights up, all of a sudden you see it through the mirror and you can interact with it. Also, it's very subtle and hard to see in some places. I'll show you in a couple of other parts of the presentation, but there's a big mirror taking up the whole side of this wall. You know, it's a trick that you use maybe in your living room to make your space feel like it's double the size. Well, the exact same thing is happening in a lot of exhibits now, where you can really increase the look and the size of your booth, the way it feels, if you put a large mirror on one wall. Corrugated materials were very popular. You have them perhaps in a plastic, perhaps in a metallic or metal finish, perhaps in sort of a corrugated board. This was a metallic, but a corrugated board. And hand in hand with that, you have cardboard, which is also a thinner corrugated material, being used as structural kiosks and counters in this booth, being structural stools in this booth, being used just for the textural look here in this display, and used as cutout letters with just that interesting texture around the edges. In these areas here, they specifically took the cardboard and cut out a pattern to just reveal an interesting texture and repetition pattern. This exhibit was also built completely out of recycled cardboard. And like I mentioned earlier, just anything tactile, anything with dimension, anything that made you want to kind of reach out and touch it. We had velvet, we had dimensional pieces, we had crocodile, we have wood of all kinds of shapes, these things that are just layered and look like something that is interesting to just reach out and grab. This booth was made with a really interesting chain that's able to be printed. It moves, you can kind of walk through it or touch it, and it moves with your hand. So it was a pretty spectacular booth. Felt was a texture that we saw all over the place, right? You have texture here, the felt is printed all the way through, or the color is integral rather, so you can cut it on a CNC machine to create this really interesting texture. This was a very clever way to cover a double deck booth. Very cool. Cut out a perforated pattern, cut different shapes. We saw felt in just a number of applications. Press board was also a very popular material, perhaps coated, like in this case with white or black. In this case, there was some coated with coral and turquoise. You can see a tiny bit in the back of that picture. You could also see it often unfinished, similar to the unfinished wood that we looked at recently. And it creates a really interesting texture. Fabric was used a lot, kind of similar to look to the corrugated when it's just rippling like this, but it's much softer and more flexible. Obviously, this was a really interesting way that someone incorporated draped fabric. This company was a fabric company, and they had these just long bands of fabric that translated then into carpet on the floor. So it was a very cool use of space. These are just flat panels of fabric, crinkled fabric with backlighting behind it. Brick was everywhere, perhaps as a three-dimensional texture that you can see in some of these. And then also, if you don't have the budget for the textured stuff, printed was used just as much. Just the brick texture was so popular that it was often a printed material. Now, as far as structural trends, there are several I want to show you. This peaked roof shape was highly popular. Everywhere I looked, I saw this peaked roof shape all over throughout the 16 halls at EuroShop. The elongated arches could be formatted as an actual arch, a doorway to get into an exhibit space, or it was also used just as a shape, perhaps rounded on both ends and just a really long shape with rounded ends. arches, LED lights, partition screen with the upside down arches. This shape was quite popular. And as we know, as we've seen in the past, trends that we've seen at EuroShop tend to trickle over to the United States. Some of these are probably already here, but there's just slight tweaks that happen over time. And so those are the things that we were really trying to pay attention to. So barrier screens, sometimes on the edge of a booth, sometimes just to encapsulate a small meeting space. It was really important that there were barrier screens around the outside of some exhibit spaces, but there was almost always some way to peek in, whether it was a frosted glass, whether it was a really huge opening where they definitely wanted you to look in and see what was happening in their booth, and more, it was more to control where you could enter from this space as well using the string partition. They just were trying to control how you could enter this space, but by defining the space with these different textures, with these different elements, these different types of screens, whether it's glass or more opaque type of barrier screen, they really created some very strong and unique experiences in these different spaces. Perforated patterns are a really cool way to do some barrier screens. You can cut out just these large patterns. Sometimes, like in this case, this was derived from the company's logo, and they cut this really interesting pattern out, or it could just be something where you're creating an interesting texture with this larger scale perforated pattern. Sometimes it was a good way to incorporate interesting edge lighting or LED lighting, as in these examples here. Containers were used as display, especially for companies that do some sort of shipping as part of their company's services. Also, just as a way to display items on the wall. Squares and cubes were a very popular shape. You have them out of the unfinished wood, out of the mirror, out of, as pendant lights. Here's a cube structure made out of aluminum and then turned on its side to create some interest, some product displays, and lighting, and circles and spheres in contrast to the cubes make really good complementary pieces. For instance, these two examples here on the very left side of the screen. You can't see it super well in this photograph, but this booth here on the top was essentially made of a big black cube with just these bands of extrusion that went around, and then it was as though a sphere had been cut out of the middle of that cube. And so with each band, the shape changed, and you could see the sphere get larger in the middle, and then even in the back wall, it's as though a sphere was pressed into that back wall because these layers got deeper and deeper. Similar to this one, also a cube shape with the circles that were cut out and got deeper and deeper as though a sphere was pressed into it. Circular LED lights, circular pendant light hanging here, pieces hanging, pieces on the floor. This was pretty interesting. We saw this a couple of times, or I don't know, probably 2 or 3 booths had this interesting way of the exercise balls became a design element in the booth with all the spheres, but they also created great impromptu meeting spaces. You could basically have an impromptu meeting sitting down in the booth anywhere you wanted when you have these chairs or spheres all over the place. Slats, again, by no means is this a new concept. Slats have been around for years and years. However, the way that they're being done is really intriguing. You can have them go up and turn a corner. They can come over and around and down. They can be multiple different colors, different interesting lighting embedded in. You can make them into arches of sorts. These are curved here, and when those came around in a certain place, they were even made to be a seating area for people to enjoy down here at the bottom of this flat. They could be cut into interesting shapes they could be also, this was a really unique application where they were put in a circle and also angled in, almost a sort of teepee effect, but I didn't see anyone else doing that. So I've done this presentation now, for, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 times, and for a couple of times it was for students, and the design students wanted to know what I thought was really unique and unusual. And this is one thing that, you know, I just didn't see anywhere else. But like I was telling them, it's not that flats are a new thing. It's just that we have ways of manipulating them depending on the needs of an individual client. And it's just always interesting to be able to take a way of building a structure and tweaking it, modifying it. You know, we're varying the height of the slats. We're making them black. We're putting them in a circle. We're angling them, making these different individuals little unique spaces. That's what makes the trends new and interesting. We've got more slats. I couldn't fit them all on one slide. Everything had slats. Almost every single booth. I want to say greater than 80% of the exhibits at EuroShop had slats. So they're different though, you know, here they're just cut into this really blocky booth as a partition screen, and they're on angles. It's a really interesting angle. Here they have some mirrored flat, they have some black flat. You can see that they're angling them at a different degree, and they're slightly turning it around and around each time to just create a different effect. Here they're grouped in different sizes and different numbers. Here they are in that peaked roof shape. Here they're horizontal and varying width. So there's just so many ways to do slats. Now, color and pattern were another really fun thing to look at from a design perspective. You have black and white, which is a super classic standard convention with design that's very effective. And so lots of spaces were just very clean black and white. I would also put metallic. I would also put acrylic in that vein with black and white. Black and white, black and or white with an accent color was also a popular convention. You probably have a logo color that you want to incorporate, like some of these companies did, and combining it with just a black and white background is very dramatic. Or by that same token, black and or white plus a natural material. It was also a very popular convention. Maybe it was a printed plant or virtual plant type of texture too, or maybe it was a whitewashed wood texture. But I have a little video I want to show you about this. So here, let me see if I can pull it up real quick. Okay, that is one of the exhibits that you will recognize from that black, white, and natural slide that I just had up. This was such an interesting booth. Look, they've got clear acrylic furniture. They've got the glossy black floor. They have the whitewashed wood. They're using some white fringe as a partition wall for their meeting space. The LED light was super, super subtle. The way that they created interest in the back of this booth around the sides by having these inset rectangular or cubed spaces was just a very subtle, they just dimmed down the LED lights really nicely. And it made the booth so much more beautiful and dramatic than if they had them up full bore. There you've got some interesting perforated pattern out of a matte white texture. The furniture is a glossy white texture. Okay, so you get the picture. I'm gonna get back to the slideshow. Okay, all right, now, in contrast to the black and white, and with just a little accent hint of color, you've got 80s pop art, which is a super bright, fun trend. And there was quite a few exhibits that had this trend going on. And you've got the splash of paint, you know, you've got the different sort of patterns that you would see, or the graffiti pattern that you would see in the 80s. So this is a really fun way to go. Or a tropical pattern. This was really intriguing. Everyone had these big tropical leaf patterns of some kind. This is just a little out of the way meeting space, and they put a big tropical pattern on the wall. What I really was intrigued by is that it almost became a neutral. Like if someone had an exhibit space and they wanted to add some pattern on it, it didn't matter if they had a tropical theme or not. A lot of these exhibits did not have a tropical theme overall. It's just that they would go in and they would put a tropical pattern on an accent wall or something like this. So yeah, I'm gonna go to the, here's a tropical, this was a video wall behind the reception counter at one of the exhibits, and you could kind of see that real subtle movement going on in this tropical pattern. There was no other tropical anything in this exhibit at all. They just decided to use a tropical pattern in this prominent area and add a little movement to it, and I thought it was super effective. All right, back to the slides. Here you have some plexiglass that's bent in the shape of a big tropical leaf and used even as shelving for some products. This plexiglass booth did a really cool thing where they put plants behind their plexiglass, and you just saw the outline of some of their tropical plants that they had in there. Lighting trends. It's all about LED. You've got programmable LEDs. Okay. You've got, oh, I have some fun videos in here to show you. Hang on a second. So here's some programmable LEDs that are interacting with the movement of someone. And you'll notice those are embedded in a light box wall. This was an interesting light logo fixture that faded from the LED light, full LED light on the face, to a mirrored finish. Programmable LEDs, again, in sort of a light box application, they had these clear acrylic posts coming out so that you could set a product on it. But the movement created by these LED lights is really eye-catching and subtle too. See what I mean about the subtle thing? We've got LED lights programmed into the floor. We've got, again, really cool LED lights programmed into the LED light boxes, into hanging sign. This was a cool LED light feature that didn't require wires. Like once these were magnetically connected, you could have some LED letters connected. This was a really interesting wall that I was super intrigued by. So there's just a simple fabric that's glued to the back of mirror glass. And then very simple, I just showed you these LED bulbs that are basically stapled to the wall just several inches behind it. And when they turn, when they change color, when they fade in and out, the fabric, it goes from looking like a mirror to all of a sudden it looks like this dimensional cords of metal or something, but it's really just an effect of the fabric that's glued to the back and how the LEDs are interacting with it. Okay. And back to the lighting trend. Okay, so pendant lights were everywhere as well. You have, you know, really big, dramatic pendant lights, all with LED lighting, smaller ones and groupings. This large one that's made out of lots and lots of tiny LED bulbs. Lots of linear LED bulbs arranged in various ways, and lots of the round LED lights as well. Edison bulbs are also totally being made with LEDs these days. Nothing's being made with the old technology. It just is made to look like the old technology. This is a really fun exhibit where they made it look like these were hanging LED bulbs, but they're all hanging straight out. So defying gravity, that was real fun. Plus the use of the pop of yellow next to the black was very dramatic. Different sizes and shapes of the Edison bulbs were everywhere. Edge lighting, like I already showed you this exhibit. This one was very dramatic with these extruded shapes and LED edge lighting and all these shapes. You have it to enhance different cutouts. In between the slats, these ones in particular faded in and out, and it was a very dramatic and very intriguing the way they did that. It looked really cool in between slats again here. This was something that we saw a lot. Now the LED lights can't shine too bright. They have them dimmed down, plus they have it against the black background, which, as you know, doesn't reflect light super brightly. But in person, it looked more luxurious. It looked more high-end than something, for instance, where you had the bright LED lights in your face. Neon. Okay, again, just like with the Edison bulb, you have this old technology that we're imitating now with LED, new technology. So they've created a really rounded, clean gasket and, with consistent LED light throughout that looks just like neon, but it doesn't have all the downfalls of neon where it breaks easily or it's hard to manage. Like this is, all being done with simple LED tubes, and it's made to look like neon. That's a trend. Kind of goes along with the 80s pop art trend, that whole throwback thing. And plants were another huge trend. I mean, there was greenery in almost every booth, even in some exhibits where they didn't necessarily have an automatic place to place the plants. There were little tufts of greenery that they would just plop on top of a column or stuff into some sort of crevice in the booth somewhere. It was so important that, I don't know, I think people were like, how do I get greenery into my booth? And they found ways. Even sometimes it looked a little cheesy. This was, I think, a good example of how they put the little tufts of greenery in, but there were some that were not quite as effective. You got it in the floor. It could be different lengths. A lot of times it was hanging from the ceiling, either on strings, and here you can see it next to some Edison bulbs. You've got whole potted plants that were hanging. Sometimes we saw hanging potted plants upside down, and so I'm pretty certain a lot of these are not real plants, maybe false plants, but hanging plants from your ceiling, hanging plants. This was an interesting use on a hanging sign. Green walls, still extremely popular, but you have a lot of options. They can be curved, they can have different lengths to create a message in the green wall. Again, it's behind plexiglass in some instances. It's creating a really interesting texture along with those tactile solid pieces. You can put it in different shapes. And then organic was a trend that we saw a lot. So this kind of ties in with plants. Plants are very organic, but the shapes that people created with their built structures as well. There was a lot of organic trends that we saw. Okay, human form. This exhibit was so stunning. Now from the sides, it just looked like extruded pieces. You might remember it from one of the LED slides, but from the front, it's a face and hands. You had hands in a lot of exhibits. It was very dramatic when you had some large hands holding the product or small hands holding the product. The face, again, you have in this exhibit is really eye-catching, a very effective way to get people's attention. Plants and animals. You have the form of trees using slats most often, but then you have just different forms of animals, whether it's using a green wall and some different wood textures. You have it with corrugated, you have it with slats, you have it with cut CNC shapes, you have this glossy frog about to pounce on the exhibit. Organic shapes, whether made with fabric, whether cut out of the unfinished wood, plywood, cut into these interesting curved shapes. It creates an interesting way to put specialty lighting in. Here's another example of a booth that has mirror all along one wall. It's actually hard to like really figure out where the mirror starts and stops. But basically this guy is being reflected over here. So this whole thing, you know, they built it once, but then they reflected it and it looks twice as big. Okay, they've got really, this was a very beautiful booth, very well executed over here with organic shapes. It almost felt like you were walking into a man-made cave. Okay, I think I have a few minutes left. So when I did this with students, I had these fun slides where it was like, okay, everyone, call out the trends you see. So it was like, oh, elongated arch here, and pressboard, and tropical leaves, and plants, and unfinished wood, and you know, the movement and technology, the pendant lights. So we had fun with this, but since the format of this webinar is a little different, I'm just going to wrap everything up with some walking tours that I videoed of some of my favorite exhibits at EuroShop. Okay, so this is the one that you've seen in several slides, but it's got everything, I think. It's got the organic frog, it's got the glossy materials, it's got the matte materials, it's got the short throw projector that's interactive, it's got the neon, it's got the textural pieces here, it's got the plants, it's got the black and white floor with the pop of green. These tables actually were on somewhat of a spring, I think, which ties in with the frog theme that they had. The glossy furniture, glossy frog, mirrored walls, plants up here, hanging pendant lights, both the linear and the round. The lettering on the other side of the booth, we might get back to that at the end of the video, is mirror. Oh, you can see it there too. Cut mirror letters. I was really intrigued by this pattern that they just decided to paint on the wall because of the scale of it. Sort of like the perforated patterns is a little bit larger than your typical pattern that you would get with another type of texture. So that's a really fun video. I'm gonna open up a new one for you. Okay, here's the booth that has the velvet walls. It's got video walls, and it has unfinished wood. It has the human form of the faces. This piece here has three-dimensional movement with this with the gears that are moving, but it also, oh, and it's the one that has the tropical pattern at the back with the subtle movement. It's got a flat counter, a cool little angle cut into it. Also, you have slaps on this human face over here. This one's interactive. You have touch screens down here on the bottom with screens of pubs that are interacting. There's a screen behind the 3D gears that's just creating movement. It's not actually showing, it's not actually 3D gears through that whole piece. Part of it is video wall and part of it is real. Oh, and then this one was also a favorite, so I'm glad we had time to squeeze this in for you. This exhibit, oh my gosh, black, glossy floor and wall, the perforated pattern over here with the barrier wall, creating these two nice, I mean, I wanted to go in and hang out in these meeting areas. The human form of the face, the LED edge light on these different pieces, super subtle. LED edge light, look at the LED edge light in the counter, look at it in the floor. Very intricate, very well done. Very beautiful. I mean, it was a stunner. Okay, I'm so glad we had time to look at those, because I have to say, the walking tours that I did in the booth, these were my favorite ones. And I really wanted to show everyone when I got back. So I'm glad I had a chance to share them with you. I do want to mention, before we have to get off the call, I know our time is running short, I wanted to mention that I have a lot of these photos and videos, probably even more than what you've seen in the presentation today. I have them all at the Classic Exhibits Instagram. As I was over there in Europe, I was posting like crazy to try and get these things out. So if you go to @classic_exhibits and follow us, or you just want to go check out all the posts I did from EuroShop, that is a great place to go look and check those out. Hopefully we'll get to do this again soon. Hope you're all hanging in there. Thanks for joining me today. Take care, okay, everyone?